Hello and welcome to iTalk. I'm Chris Burns, standing in for Alex Taylor. The British government plans a referendum in 4 years on whether the UK should remain in the European Union. The country is deeply divided, with recent polls indicating a thin majority of voters favoring an EU exit. Well, joining us to take your questions is Daniel Hannan, a member of the European Conservatives and Reformists group in the European Parliament. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hannan.
Thank you.
We got a whole string of questions, so let's get right to them, starting with a gentleman from Belgium.
Hello, my name is Lionel and I'm Belgian. My question to Mr Hannan: if you're a eurosceptic, then why are you a deputy at the European Parliament?
Mr. Hannan, why would you want to bite the hand that feeds you?
Yes, I'm often asked that, and very often not as politely as that. It's more along the lines of, what are you doing here when you don't even believe blah, blah, blah. I mean, there are two answers to that. First of all, it's supposed to be a representative assembly. And I'm surprised by how many euro-federalists who believe in it being a sort of parliament for the whole continent then turn out to have a problem when it is, in fact, representative. Now, I don't pretend for a moment that my views are shared by everyone in my southeast of England constituency. They may not even be shared by most people in my southeast of England constituency. We'll find that out at the election. But they are certainly shared by some people. And it's an odd and, I think, slightly disquieting argument that says you should only be allowed to take your place in a democratic legislature if you think in a particular way.
Mr. Hannan, we've got another question now from a woman from Spain who seems to think that she hears a lot from Britons suggesting that they seem to know it all. Let's see what she has to say.
Hello, my name is Carmen. I'm Spanish. My question is, why are the British giving the rest of Europe lessons on the economy and morality?
Daniel, do you know it all?
Part of the problem in the whole European project has been that different countries with different visions of how society and the economy should work have reached compromises that satisfy nobody. And that's why I would be much happier with a situation where Britain lived under its own laws and made no attempt to advise any neighbouring country on how they should run their affairs.
But what about making compromises in order to be part of a larger whole? What about making compromises to be part of a larger whole and a more powerful whole?
Well, this is, as I understand, what your questioner was complaining about. It was precisely that, which comes, you know, what you've just said is what she calls preaching. I would be much happier if each country made its own decisions in its own essentially domestic matters. It would be a more democratic and a more satisfactory resolution for all countries if they restricted European cooperation to issues of a genuinely cross-border nature, and then in their domestic policies all did their own thing. But precisely because I don't want to preach, it's not for me to tell Belgium and Spain and Germany that they should do that. If they want to pool their sovereignty, good luck. They will be able to rely on our goodwill, on our open markets, on our military alliance, but we would rather not compromise our democracy or bargain with our independence. We would rather be a good neighbour than a bad tenant.
Okay, Daniel, a bit of a segue to our next question, this from a gentleman in Spain. Question of influence, how much influence the UK could have either in the European Union or out.
My name is Adam, I'm Spanish. My question is, the British believe their city is losing power within the EU. If you leave the EU, considered to be the most powerful economy in the world, will you not lose even more influence?
Daniel, what do you think?
You know, this idea that you have to be part of a very large bloc to be prosperous, if that were true, China would be wealthier than Hong Kong, and Indonesia would be wealthier than Singapore. The way you succeed in the world is by getting your tax and regulatory regime right, not by being part of an especially large bloc. And look, just to be absolutely clear about this, no one in the UK is suggesting that we shouldn't buy and sell and trade with our friends and allies on the continent. I've not heard that argument from anyone, in fact, on either side of the channel. The people who are most keen on a Brexit in the place where I work in the European Parliament, even they are all in favour of our participation on some kind of Swiss type.
But how much would that door be open to British workers if the UK were not in the EU? That is our next question from a woman from France. Let's listen to what she has to say.
My name is Isabelle, I'm French, and I wanted to know what's going to become of the hundreds of thousands of Britons living and working in Europe if Great Britain leaves the European Union.
So how much are you worried that the door might slam shut on all the Brits working on the continent?
Well, I can remember quite a lot of Brits living and working on the continent before the common market existed. There were hundreds of thousands of British people in Spain before Spain joined the EU in 1986, and you can reach bilateral agreements on these issues without needing to be EU members. One of the big fallacies in this argument is that those who are against Brussels running things are therefore against international cooperation. We're not. We want the closest possible relations between different countries, but that should be contracted on the basis of intergovernmental democratic accords between friendly countries.
I've got a Belgian woman who has a question about how you see the European Union.
Hello, Mr Hannan. My name is Julie. I'm Belgian. I'd like to know why you say that Europe is not democratic or progressive, but elitist.
Is that what you think, that Europe is not democratic?
Well, there is an old joke in Brussels to the effect that if the EU were a country applying to join itself, it would be turned down because it wasn't democratic enough. It is an extraordinary situation, and it doesn't become any more acceptable just because we're accustomed to it with the passage of time, that legislative and executive power should be concentrated in the hands of 27 commissioners who are invulnerable to public opinion.
But that's evolving. That's evolving. That is an executive side, but there is also the legislative side, which is gaining power, as we see, through the Lisbon Treaty and so forth.
Well, here you come to a fundamental problem with how you conceive democracy, because democracy is not just a periodic right to mark a cross on a ballot paper every 5 years. Democracy also depends on a relationship between government and governed, an affinity, a common allegiance between the people who pass the laws and the people who are expected to obey the laws. Now, that happens within a nation state. That happens in Portugal, in Sweden, in Japan, in Canada. Very few people feel European in the same sense that somebody feels Japanese or Canadian. And the problem, if you try and create the institutions of statehood without a sustaining sense of nationhood, is that you end up with a government that is alienated from the people, that has no sense of public legitimacy. And we're about to see, apparently, the spectacle of MEPs voting on the budget in secret because they don't dare own publicly what they're prepared to do in private. That is, I'm afraid, no democracy. A democracy requires a demos, a unit with which we identify when we use the word we. And if you take the demos out of democracy, you're left only with the kratos, with the power of a system that has to compel by law what it can't ask in the name of patriotism.
We're running out of time. I'd love to debate this for another half an hour, but we have one last question I'd like to fit in if possible. Cedric in Belgium with a hot-button issue of immigration. Let's hear what he says.
Mr Hannan, hello, I'm Cedric, I'm Belgian, and I have a question for you. What do you think of England's immigration policy vis-à-vis Eastern European countries?
Daniel, what do you think?
I was a supporter of allowing inward migration from the rest of the EU. I'm a believer in free movement of labour. I think there are concerns about abuse of benefits, which are common to a number of Western European countries, are in no sense limited to the United Kingdom. But those things can be addressed by a clarification on what social entitlements you're allowed to access when you arrive and how long you have to have been paying into the system before you can start claiming. I wouldn't challenge the fundamental basis of free movement of labour. I think it's a good thing. And by the way, I wouldn't accept that it's anti-European to be critical of these things. I consider myself very European. I speak French, I speak Spanish. I've lived and worked all over the continent. What I want is what I think was Europe's greatest contribution to the happiness of mankind, which is the evolution of parliamentary government and freedom under the rule of law. My quarrel with the EU is that it's turned its back on those things.
Daniel Hannan, thank you very much for joining us on the program. That's all for now on iTalk. Until next time, I'm Chris Burns. Thanks for watching.